Okay, so the National Park Service has guidelines for safe viewing distances for when you're like looking at wildlife. If you're looking at like a small animal, they say to try to be about 25 yards away at least. For large animals, most large animals, they recommend you stay at least 50 yards away. And for large predators, they recommend that you stay at least 100 yards away, right? 100 yards of the football field. And if you're like not familiar with that, 100 yards is about the width of our parking lot. So if you go all the way to that end of the parking lot and you go all the way to the other, that's about the distance you want to stay when you're viewing a large predator. And these guidelines are there because animals are fast. And you don't want to get into a situation where one chases you, okay? And so for context, the fastest human has been, their speed that's been recorded is 27.8 miles per hour. And so I would say the average adult human, you're probably looking at like 15 miles an hour. That's average. So if you're like a runner, you might be able to go like a little faster. Some of you, you might struggle with about 15, right? But that's actually on a smooth track surface. If everything was good, you stretched and you ran. So if you were in nature and there's roots and tall grass and trees, I think we're lucky to get to like 10 miles an hour, okay? 10 miles an hour is a 6-minute mile pace, right? So average, like if you're like, I'm fast, yeah, sure, you might be getting like 13, but if you're a little bit slower, you might not hit double digits, okay? Now animals, on the other hand, are a lot faster than we think. Bears can go 25 to 35 miles per hour, depending on what kind of bear they are. Like a black bear that we see around here is more like 25. Do you know even pandas can go 20? Pandas, who literally sit around and do nothing but eat and poop, if they had to, can go 20 miles an hour. That's like, that's amazing. A mountain lion can go 40. Have you guys seen, there's these videos, I wanted to show you, but there's like a lot of swearing in it because the guy was super scared. But there's a guy who's like running somewhere out west, and a mountain lion starts to follow him, and he's like, and the mountain lion does this thing where it like attacks and backs up and like growls, and it's happening for like several minutes, and he's yelling at the mountain lion, swearing at the mountain lion, and it's like scary, okay? So they can go 40 miles an hour. They actually have a vertical of 15 feet. And vertical, that's like, bottom of your feet, right? So they can just jump 15 feet from a standstill. If they like ran a little bit and jumped, and then they were able to kind of like use their hands and claw up, they can get to 40 feet. That's insane. 40 feet, right? So yeah, you don't want to get chased by one of them, right? A moose can go 35 miles an hour, and so can buffalo, okay? And so, again, I like numbers. Right. So if an animal is not just running fast, but if an animal is gaining on you, that's like if you were standing still and just running at you. If it's gaining on you at around like 20 miles per hour, that 100 yards is going to get covered in probably around like 12 seconds, right? So that means, that's why they tell you, like, stay away, because if you're like, oh, look, grizzly bear, and you're 100 yards away, and then it wants to eat you, you have about 12 seconds to decide what you're going to do. Like, you can run and be like up a tree or whatever, and some bears can climb trees, which is also scary too, right? But that's why they tell you, because you don't want to get chased by an animal. Now we're in 1 Kings chapter 19 today, and this is where Elijah is on the run. He is being chased, and his life is being threatened. So last week we were in chapter 18. That's when Elijah challenges the prophets of Baal, and he wins that. God, brings the fire and shows the people that God is God. And so what happens is the people for a time turn away. They get rid of the prophets of Baal. But the problem is you still have Ahab, the king, and the queen Jezebel. And Jezebel is all about Baal, right? Because she's not an Israelite. So she came in. She's all about Baal. And so Jezebel is going after Elijah now. And so Elijah is on the run, and his life does not get any easier after he defeats the prophets of Baal. Okay, and so this is where we're at in chapter 19 today, and so the first part, it's in two parts. The first part is verse 1 to 9, 1 to 9a, and Elijah flees to Mount Horeb. Right? Here's a fun fact, right? Because a lot of times you see these words and you're like, what's this place? Mount Horeb and Mount Sinai are the same place. And there's a picture for this. I realized I forgot to put that in the note. There he goes. Okay, so this kind of gives you context of where we're at. So in chapter 18, Elijah is at Mount Carmel, right? And that's where the showdown with him and the prophets of Baal are. Okay, after he wins, he goes to Jezreel, right? That's about 15. That's where the amazing story of Ahab's like, oh, I'm going to go to Jezreel, and Elijah just like outruns him on a horse. Ahab's on a horse, and Elijah outruns him. I love that, right? And then afterwards, he has to flee because they want to kill him, and so he goes all the way to Mount Horeb, right? That's far, so he's not messing around. He's scooting. Okay, and then Beersheba is the place where he kind of leaves off one of his servants, so they don't have to keep fleeing. But let me read to you verse 1 to 9, so we get the story here. Okay, so now Ahab told Jezebel everything Elijah had done. So Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah to say, "May the gods deal with me, be it ever so severely, if by this time tomorrow I do not make your life like that of one of them being the prophets of Baal." Elijah was afraid and ran for his life. When he came to Beersheba in Judah, he left his servant there, while he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness. He prayed that he might die. "I have had enough, Lord," he said. "Take my life. I am no better than my ancestors." Then he fell asleep. All at once, an angel touched him and said, "Get up and eat." He looked around, and there by his head was some bread and a jar of water. He ate and drank and then lay down again. The angel of the Lord came back a second time and said, "Get up and eat, for the journey is too much for you." So he got up and ate and drank. Strengthened by that food, he traveled 40 days and 40 nights until he reached Horeb, the mountain of God. There he went into a cave and spent the night. And so one of the interesting things here is that God provides for Elijah after Elijah complains. And I think that really shows that we can be honest with God. A lot of times we feel like we need to present a good facade, a good face, right? Especially in Asian culture, right? We always want to make sure people think that we've got it all together, even though we don't. And then we all know that none of us have it together, but we're all going to live and pretend that we all do and smile and nod at each other while we all live messed up lives. That's just how we do things, right? With God, you don't have to do that, because that's really exhausting, right? To always try to be like, everything's good in my life, right? You don't have to do that with God. First of all, God already knows. And then here we see Elijah complains to God. It's just like, oh, everything's terrible. And then God then provides, right? So God is not going to punish you for being honest if you complain. Okay, so be honest with God. You can do that, and it's so freeing. Okay, and then we get to the second part, and this is where we're going to kind of focus on. It's verse 9b all the way to 18. All right, God appears to Elijah. I'm just going to read verse 9 to 10. And the word of the Lord came to him. "What are you doing here, Elijah?" He replied, "I have been very zealous for the Lord God Almighty. The Israelites have rejected your covenant, torn down your altars, and put your prophets to death with the sword. I am the only one left, and now they are trying to kill me too." Right? And Elijah continues to complain, and it's understandable. Right? If somebody's trying to kill you, you're kind of allowed to complain. I don't like it when my kids complain, but they complain about stuff like taking showers and like not eating their vegetables, even though it's like one piece Just want you to try it, right? They complain about that, right? If your life is in danger, go ahead, okay? And so he continues to complain. It's understandable. And I love how God responds. God doesn't give him a solution or anything like that. What God does is God responds with his presence. And it's in I'm going to read verse 11 to 13. The Lord said, "Go out and stand on the mountain in the presence of the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by." Then a great and powerful wind tore the mountains apart and shattered the rocks before the Lord. That's a really powerful wind there. But the Lord was not in the wind. After the wind, there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake came a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire came a gentle whisper. When Elijah heard it, he pulled his cloak over his face and went out and stood at the mouth of the cave. And so this is kind of where we're going to focus on, and this is where we're going to get to okay, what does this mean for us? Like, what are we going to get out of this, and how do we grow our faith? How do we come closer to Jesus? I think the first thing is this. We need God's presence. We need it. It's not something that's just like nice. We need God's presence. We often just say we need God. I like how I wanted to add that word presence in there because it just makes it more real and present, right? Right? Because we say, "Oh, I need God." Okay, like what does that mean? Like God does stuff, right? But we need God's presence, right? We need him here. God's presence gives us strength, right? When God's presence comes, Elijah is strengthened. So after this, in verse 13, God sends Elijah back. He says, "Hey, you're going to go back and you're going to do certain things, right? You're going to go and anoint Hazael king over Aram. You're going to anoint Jehu king over Israel," which is going to make Ahab and Jezebel even more upset, right? And then you're going to anoint Elisha to succeed him, right? So Elijah is then followed by Elisha, right? So he goes. He has tasks for him to go, and Elijah goes from like, "Just kill me now," to, "All right, let's go," right? Because God's presence gives us strength. God's presence gives us confidence. Right? Elijah was, on the run because he was scared for his life, and now he's confident. He goes. God's presence also gives us motivation. A lot of times we in our faith, we lack confidence and we lack motivation. And we wonder why. I think so much of it is because we're not focused on, is God's presence in my life? Do I experience it? We kind of focus on our ability to do things and our comfort level. Right? We're like, "Oh, God has called me to do A, B, and C," and like, "Oh, those are hard. I'm not comfortable doing that." And so we don't have the confidence to go do it. We don't have the motivation to do it. It's when we have God's presence in us, when we experience God's presence, it's just going to come out naturally. We're going to be motivated. We're going to be confident. We're going to have the strength to do what God has called us to do. But the thing about God's presence, it's not just a simple, "Yeah, okay, have God's presence, you're all good." Even though, because we know God is present everywhere. It's not like God is ever not around. Okay, so then it's like, "Hey, what do you mean by God's presence? Like, what does that mean?" The thing about God's presence is it often, not always, but it often comes at our lowest times, right? So take heart, right? That's an idiom for take courage. I think people still use that, but I was like, maybe not. I could be getting older and people use that term. But take heart, right? So when you're at your lowest, right, when things are not going well in your life, and or things are just dragging, and you feel like nothing's going to change, take heart, because when you feel like God is not there, he's so much closer than you think, right? Elijah was a wanted man. He certainly, think about it, he just saw God do this incredible miracle, sending fire on the altar, right? He saw the people turn back to the Lord, even briefly, right? He saw all of that, but then things fall apart, and he's on the run. And so it can change really quickly, but God is always there. And so when you're at your lowest and you feel like God is far away, he is much closer than you think. The second thing is this: God's presence is often quiet. I think a lot of us, we want God to like show up and do some amazing thing, and then it doesn't happen. We get kind of upset, but that's just not how God's presence always manifests. Like it's often quiet. So for us, we have to pay attention. I think a lot of times we just miss God's presence showing up. Right? We got to pay attention. It came to Elijah in a gentle whisper. Right? The wind, the earthquake, the fire, those are big things. Those are obvious. It's like huge, and God's presence wasn't there. And then afterwards, Elijah had to listen, right? He had to hear that gentle whisper. And so that's why, whether it's, you want to call it quiet time or whatever, that's why like Christians call it quiet time. It's that time you take to spend with the Lord when you are quiet, when you kind of take distractions away, and that's often when God's presence is there. Now, here's the truth of it all, right? It's easy to say, oh, in your quiet times, be still. Put away your distractions. And, meditate on the word or whatever, and God will come. Right? It's easy to say that, and I'm sure a lot of you have tried, and you're like, yeah, it doesn't really work. Right? Why is that? Because I think a lot of times we can't actually put away our distractions on our own. Right? I mean, how many of you don't have to raise your hand, but how many of you have been in a situation where you're trying to pray, trying to do your devotionals, whatever? I know I've been in this situation, and you're doing it, and all of a sudden you're like, why am I thinking about like what I'm gonna do like today? Like, wait, how did I even get here? Right? You're like reading the Bible, and you're thinking about Chipotle for lunch would be nice. Yeah, I think they got that new meat. I'll try that. And you're like, whoa, and then it happens all the time because distractions, we're just always distracted, and our minds are going, and we can't, like, we can say, stop it, just be quiet. We can't do it. So here's a pro tip. You just got to pray. Right? You're like, what? Right? Like, if there's something you cannot do, right? Like something as simple as quieting your heart and quieting, you can't do that, and I feel like that's all of us, then only God can do that. So if you want God's presence, and you're just like, God, I want your presence in my life, but my brain is going a mile a minute, and I can't do it. Like, you can't. Like, there's nothing you can do about it. That's when you just give it to God and say, God, you want to be in my life. I want you in my life, but I've got a problem with my brain. And so you give that to God, right? It's one of those things where you're like, what? Like, really? Like, I don't have to do something else? No, like, those are things. If it's out of your control and you're out of your capabilities, give that to the Lord. And here's the last one. God's presence changes everything and requires a response. So for us, it's do something. Do anything. Right? It requires a response. The problem here is this. The question is, do you want God's presence in your life? Do you really want it? From last week, in chapter 18, verse 21, I'm going to read it again. Elijah went before the people and said, how long will you waver between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal is God, follow him. But the people said nothing. If we're honest with ourselves, sometimes we don't actually want God's presence in our life. Because if God's presence was there and God showed up, then we actually kind of need to do something and respond. And we're actually kind of content where we're at. if we're really honest, I think we often, and this is not like, this is everybody, like even people who have been believers for a long time, we're just kind of okay with things the way they are, and we don't want our life rocked. We don't want to have to do anything extra, so we don't want God's presence. Like, we want all the benefits of God, but we're like, God, like, I'll check in with you when I need you, right? I think a lot of times that's how we view the Lord. And that if God's presence comes, we're like, oh man, I gotta like do something, so let's just avoid that. Because the truth is this, asking for God's presence might lead to hardship. It certainly did with Elijah, right? God's presence and being a prophet made his life miserable at times. But here's the thing. It might be hard, but it is worth it. In John chapter 10, verse 10, says, in the second part of verse 10, I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. Being a Christian, following Jesus, it's not always easy. There are very few promises in the Bible where it's like, oh yeah, do this, everything's going to be easy. No, it's not going to be easy. That was never the point. I think we've kind of just stuck that in there and then like, that's nice. Because it is. I mean, think about it, right? If you looked at Christianity as like a product and you're in marketing, would you want to sell it as, hey, believe in Jesus, things get tough for you? No, you always want to push the easy stuff, right? The benefits. Hey, you're going to have eternal life. That's true. Hooray. And then you're going to say all this blessing stuff. And that is going to happen, but it's not an every day, this is your whole life now. There's going to be hardship because we live in a fallen world, right? We live in a world that doesn't love Jesus. And so if we follow the Lord, sometimes stuff will happen. But it's worth it. It is so worth it. I mean, the thing I think that Christians, especially in America, really struggle with is a faith that just doesn't match the faith that we see in the Bible. Right? It's just like in the Bible, things are going crazy. Like, oh my goodness, like this happened. Like you got thrown in the lion's den, and like you didn't get eaten. Like how'd that work? Did the lions like become super friendly and purr at you and you snuggle with them? Or that's the story of Daniel, by the way. Or did the angel come and was just like fighting lions all night and like defending you? I don't know. But that's crazy. Like that's the faith we see in the Bible, and yet in our lives, in America, where we're the richest nation in the world, and even when you feel like, oh man, my life's tough compared to other countries, everything's easy, and we kind of like it. And that's not bad. I'm not saying it's bad, just saying that's just the reality we live in. So all of a sudden, this idea of, oh, God's presence, you want this, it's like, oh, but I'm kind of comfortable here, okay? And so that question, right? Do you want God's presence in your life? That becomes so important to ask, right? If you're a Christian in a country that's like that persecutes Christians, like you're saying, yes, I want God's presence because I'm probably going to die and I need the Lord for like just the most basic things. In America, we don't have that. Our persecution is really lame. Like the kind of the persecution that Christians in America complain about, like, oh no, like if I pray, people look at me weird. Like, oh, that's not persecution, right? But that's the world we live in. I'm not saying it's good or bad. It's just, it is what it is. This is the world God has us in. And so for us, that question of, do I want God's presence in my life becomes so important for us to ask. And I hope you do that. I hope you ask that question, because when you experience it, it changes everything. And I think for young people, this is where like you're going to struggle, because as young people, you have these moments, whether it's retreats or your summer trips, where you really experience God's presence and you have this like super high, and then like things get normal and you get low, and You're like, oh, and it goes back and forth. That up and down is not comfortable to live in, right? You know something's not right with your faith when it goes up and down. And so two things happen. One is that you mature in your faith, and God's presence becomes less crazy, and it becomes this quiet voice, becomes kind of normal in your life. But it's this still quiet voice, and you mature, and you don't have those highs and lows. You're just kind of walking with the Lord. Right? The other one is this. That up and down gets really uncomfortable, and you know it's kind of like, it's not like authentic, and so you go the other way. You say, you know what? I want to avoid those times of really seeing God's presence, because I know the other end of it is this low, and I don't want that anymore because I feel like a fraud. And so little by little, we're just like, you know what? Let me just have this baseline down here where it's like, I don't ever experience God's presence. I said the prayer. I probably got my insurance for hell is up to date, so I think I'm good. I'm just going to live life that way, right? Like I feel like a lot of young people, that's where you're at now, and that's where you're going to be at in the next, I don't know, like 5 to 10 years. And then older people kind of already made a decision on that, right? It's just kind of, they already decided, hey, are they going to pursue the Lord or not? They kind of just float in that area. Okay, so ask that question, and I pray, and we're going to end here, is that God will show up. If you really want God's presence in your life, God will show up. That's not like the question is, are we really honest with ourselves? Okay, so let me pray for us, but then at the end of chapter 19, Elijah does find Elisha, and that's what we're going to go next week and later, as we're going to take a look at the transition from Elijah to Elisha. Okay, but let's pray.